You are in complete control and in charge of your summit's content. That's one of the biggest things that I want people to understand is that when you invite people to speak in your summit as a guest expert, they're not in charge of what they share. You are.
Get ready to build, protect, and sell your expertise online with the Online Genius Podcast. You'll laugh. We hope you won't cry. But you'll always be informed and prepared so you can have the success you want. Here's your host, Bobby Klink.
Hey everybody, welcome to this week's episode of the Online Genius Podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Klink, and I'm really excited for today's show because we're going to be talking about two things that I think are fantastic topics for entrepreneurs to be thinking about. One is bringing simplicity to your business. And the second is virtual summits or telesummits or whatever you want to call these summits where we get together without actually physically being together. I'm excited to talk about both of these things because quite honestly, there are two things that really interest me. I'm constantly trying to simplify my life, but I'm also have been interested in virtual summits. I just participated in my second summit as a guest, and I've thought about putting one on myself. So these are topics that I'm excited to talk about. And luckily, you're not going to have to listen to me talk about it too much because I brought on a fantastic guest expert today to talk about these subjects. Specifically, her name is Milana Leshinsky. Now, she's the inventor of Telesummits and the founder of the Telesummit Academy. She teaches everything you need to know about hosting profitable online summits and virtual conferences. Now, she originally came up with the idea for virtual summits in response to having two small kids and being unable to travel to industry conferences and events. So in response, being a resourceful entrepreneur, she created the idea of having them virtually. Since then, as you probably know as an entrepreneur, thousands of telesummits and virtual summits have been hosted in hundreds of different industries, bringing peers and experts together to learn and to teach about all kinds of subject matters. Now, a telesummit is a great opportunity for you to build your email list, to become a celebrated expert, to get into the big leagues, and to accelerate your business growth, really like no other marketing strategy out there. And as the queen of simplicity, Milana simplifies the entire process of organizing a telesummit so that anyone, even a complete newbie, can hold one successfully. Now, with that, welcome to the Online Genius Podcast, Milana.
Thanks so much for having me, Bobby. I love how you almost said nobody, because a lot of people will say, I'm a newbie, therefore I'm a nobody.
Well, you know, every once in a while, there's a slip of the tongue there. Now, look,
it's a Freudian slip. Perfect.
That's right. Now, I'm excited to talk about simplicity entrepreneurship and about virtual summits. But before we get to that, I always like to get to know my guests a little bit more on a personal level. And I understand that one of the interesting things about you is you're actually a ballroom dancer. Is that right?
Wow, that's definitely not the first thing that people think of me as, but I love that you did. I do love dancing. You know, if it was called ballroom dancing, I would have never gotten into it. Actually, it was presented to me as a Latin dancing, you know, where they would teach me how to do cha-cha, samba, rumba, you know, all of those Latin hot dances. And then they sneaked in tango and foxtrot and waltz. That was the secondary piece of it, but it's all absolutely wonderful. In fact, this weekend I have my 5th dance showcase, where I am traveling to Hershey, Pennsylvania to perform and be sort of judged for fun, in a fun way.
Well, that sounds great. I have to admit, I've taken dance lessons, I think twice in my life. Once it was I think it must have been junior high school, where I grew up in Texas, and there was this tradition of, I don't even remember what it was called, but we learned things, but very country and Western style dances. So I learned then. And then after law school, I learned or took a few lessons with my now wife, and that's it. So I could not compete with you. But, you know, what first drew you to dancing, since you don't like it being called ballroom dancing?
Yeah, I mean, I called the local dance studio asking if they give hip hop lessons, because I love to watch people dance hip hop, and it felt to me like a very vigorous physical activity. I was looking to lose some weight, and I wanted to see if that's something that they offer. And they said, no, we don't do hip hop, but can we interest you in cha-cha? And I remember growing up in the former Soviet Union, going to these summer pioneer camps where kids, with absolute phenomenal dance ability look to me like something that I could never do in my life. So when the guy said cha-cha, I said, sure, I probably can't do it, but hey. And so I shocked myself by actually learning how to do all of those Latin dances. Probably don't look like those 12-year-old brilliant athletic Russian kids, but I can dance, man. I can totally dance now. For a woman in her 40s, I do pretty well.
Well, I think we probably don't look like great dancers who are teenagers anymore. I guess what I would ask though is, are there lessons that you can take from your dancing experience and apply to your business?
Oh, all the time. All the time. I talk to my teacher all the time about this. And I said, oh my God, it's just like in business. We talk about this idea that when you reach a certain level in dancing, you suddenly stop seeing that you have achieved that level because you're ready to move on to the next level. You forget to celebrate. You forget to compare yourself to your earlier self. And you always compare yourself to the people you see around you, to the people you see on TV, those, big champion level dancers. So that is a huge lesson for me, is to really realize that I'm not comparing myself to a world champion in tango. I'm comparing my tango, to the tango that I danced 3 years ago, and it is so much better today. So that is a big part of it. There's also this moment, to find something that is useful and enjoyable. It's really a balance between ease and effort. Because if you push yourself too hard in dancing, you can get hurt. If you don't try hard enough, you will not see any progress. In business, it's the same thing. And if you just stay within your comfort zone, don't learn anything new, don't try new things, you don't grow. If you try too hard, you get to burn out. And I experienced that as well in the last few years. So everything in dancing is a metaphor for business. I always come back to that.
That's fantastic. I think both of those lessons are things that I like to remember. On the first score, I like to remember that we're not in competition with anyone but ourselves. And yes, we shouldn't worry about anyone besides running our own race and improving every day. And if we focus on improving ourselves every day, we don't have to worry about anybody else. So I think that is fantastic advice.
And also a little bit of being critical. I think everybody has a different level of self-criticism. I have a very high level of that. It could have to do with the fact that I am a performer, a musician. I know I'm a classically trained musician and music teacher. So I learned to really nitpick on myself throughout my childhood through the help of my teachers. And I have transferred that into my business and into my dancing. And my teacher really reminds me that, yes, you can always do better. Absolutely. Is there the next level for your tango, for your cha-cha? Always. Even for me, he says. Even for that, Julia, somebody from Russia who's been dancing all her life and has won many championships. There is the next level for her as well. So that self-criticism, I have to remind myself that, yes, I can always do better, but I'm so happy I've gotten this far.
Yeah, I like the saying that we always tend to be our own harshest critics, and we should remember that and try to celebrate. So I like that you bring that lesson. But, now I want to actually kind of transition and move to the topics that I really wanted to talk to you about. And the first is this concept of simplicity entrepreneurship. Can you explain what that is exactly?
Yes. So simplicity entrepreneurship is an idea driven by the desire to grow your business, but without the complexities that come with a growing business, such as growing a big team, having a lot of moving pieces, being constantly busy, constantly adding things. I actually stepped away from a business almost a couple of years ago, that was making over $1 million. And I sold my half of the company to my former business partner. And I remember that right before I left, it was a year of constant busyness. We were launching, delivering, coaching, creating. The moment I would come home from a live event, we would be on the launch journey again. There's just constant flow of things, no time for self. And that's when I realized is that this is never going to end. It's going to be like this for the next 5 years. I can see myself in 2023 doing the same thing as I'm doing today. And I suddenly felt like I lost my motivation and reason to do that. I don't like planning my life out 5 years out. It feels a little scary that I know exactly what my life will look like 5 years from now. I don't think that it's a good way to be, because you always look ahead and you're not living in the present. But the idea of simplicity entrepreneurship really captivated me when I realized that I can build a very successful business on my terms with the schedule that I want, without adding too many moving pieces, too many members to my team, and really give myself that space within my business. I call that white space, where things can happen and you're okay with it. And then you come back and you continue to build your business again. And again, the word simplicity is so subjective. I actually have a group on Facebook called Simplicity Circle. And before people can join, they have to answer this question: what does simplicity mean to you? And everybody says something different. Some people say simplicity of systems and processes in my business. Other people will say simplicity of like minimalism, just less stuff. There's a general understanding that simplicity means less steps, less people, less projects. To me, simplicity also comes from understanding what feels simple to you on an individual basis. What will feel simple to you will feel complex to me, and vice versa. So how do you build a business that feels simple to you? So that's where simplicity comes from, is understanding your biggest natural abilities that make it easy and effortless and simple for you to grow your business, for you uniquely.
Well, so let me ask you a question on that. How does an entrepreneur go about figuring out what that is for them? Because I know in my life, often I feel like I have a million things going on and I'm constantly telling myself I need to simplify. I need to come up with something that will automate and systematize this, but I never get around to doing it. But so I wonder how you would advise people to kind of start the process of moving towards more simplicity in their business.
Absolutely. Well, the first step is really to ask yourself, where does it feel like you're pushing in your business? Where do you constantly feel like, yes, this is something I should be doing. I'm going to do it. I'm procrastinating, but it's so important. I need to be doing this. And so you're pushing and pushing. Or maybe there's some activities you're doing because somebody else told you that you should be doing it. And so you're following somebody else's steps or advice, but it's not really working for you. It feels hard. It feels like you're progressing slow. You're starting to feel a bit inadequate. You're starting to experience that guilt around not getting to it, right? That's where I call you're pushing. And so instead of pushing, you want to ask yourself, is this the area where you can apply what you're good at? So you already know naturally a little bit what you're good at, because that's when you feel in the flow. That's when you feel like you're getting results, usually, typically, as opposed to maybe some of the other activities. And so the first step is to ask yourself, where does it feel like you're pushing? The second question to ask yourself, what feels like it comes with ease and flow? And then the third question to ask yourself is, am I doing these things because someone else told me to? Or because I'm admiring this person who is so successful with this strategy and I want to do it too? Or am I doing it because I am personally inspired and drawn to it? Those are the three questions I would ask you to start with, because if you're doing something because you are trying to replicate another person's success without understanding the backstory, without understanding their journey to how they got to that point of success, you may actually be painting yourself into a corner like I did a couple of years ago, ending up with $1 million business that I did not want to run.
Well, it's interesting you say listening to other people or because someone else told you to do something might be a problem. When I think about it, I think probably the biggest problem I have is that I've listened to too many different people telling me all of the different things that I should be doing. And so I think a lot of entrepreneurs like me end up basically trying to pick and choose. But the problem is everyone is telling you something different, so we can get overwhelmed. Would you suggest that we should kind of one piece of advice I've heard is pick one or two mentors and listen to them and ignore everything else. Is that something you think is a good piece of advice for simplicity's sake?
I definitely will make certain things simple for you, right? And I'm so glad you brought that up, because I used to have a mentor who would tell me, Milana, you just need one mentor. Just one mentor, follow their system, follow their blueprint, and get to the point of success with their system. And that totally made sense to me at that time. Looking back, and actually it's probably the first time I'm realizing it, Bobby, as I'm talking to you, that very same mentor attempted to take me in the direction that I didn't want to go. He wanted me to start networking around the country, travel, and giving my talks to all these coaching groups and networking conferences within the coaching industry, which is the niche that I was working in. And I couldn't do it. I'm not a networker. I also had 2 small kids at home. It didn't fit my schedule. And slowly, I felt like I was being pushed into a business model that I didn't see myself growing into. And something just told me, I don't know, I was very naive. That was years ago. But in that aspect, I think I valued my family and my time with my kids to the point where I said, you know what? I don't think so. And I fired that mentor and I let him go. So yes, he was my one and only at that time, and it was easy and it was simple to follow his approach and his system. But when it got to a point where it no longer fit my lifestyle and my values, I let it go.
I think that makes sense. And I think the advice I've heard people talk about, and you could pick people on such different places on the online entrepreneurship spectrum, where you could see that you couldn't really do both. You couldn't, for example, adopt Russell Brunson's ideas of funnels and then at the same time adopt some of the other principles of other people who say, no, you just need to have one high ticket offer and nothing else. So to some extent, you got to pick between those two.
Exactly. Isn't that confusing? That can be very confusing. I like to say that there is no guru. You are the guru, which basically means that hand on your heart, does this feel the direction that you want to go in? Does this feel like you're drawn to it? Does this feel like this is the business you want to build? Because if you don't love growing your business today, using the methods that you are being advised to use, what makes you think that you will love what you end up creating in the future, right? So you have to really have some sort of a filter. I actually, in my simplicity programs, I teach people to create their own simplicity filter. It's a series of unique and individualized questions that you have to ask yourself every time you're making a decision. And there's a point where you stop asking these questions and you just know them because you've asked these questions so many times. You already know if this is the right decision for you or not. But at the beginning, it's the filter that you have to run all of your decisions, all of your projects. Even things like, how much should I price my program at? Or should I have high-end clients? For example, my simplicity filter tells me that I don't want high-end clients. I should not have a high-end program. And yet there are a lot of people who will swear by the idea of having a high-end offer in their business. And in the past, I would feel guilty for not creating one. I would feel kind of embarrassed about not having it. And there would be people who would ask me, well, how is it working for you? Sort of like shaming me into creating one. And then I did. I created one and it never worked. I never succeeded with my high-end offer because there is a disconnect for me for many different reasons, which I now understand much better now that I have understood my natural abilities. I have my own simplicity filter. I know what business model and what marketing strategy I should be using in my business. So that understanding comes through discovering your natural abilities, or what I call your super skills. What are your super skills? And even if you know them, can you translate them into a profitable activity?
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I think what I'm hearing you say is that a large part of this is knowing yourself. And it's always interesting to me. Earlier today, I was in a Facebook group, a pretty active one among online entrepreneurs, and someone asked, well, what do you guys think? For my weekly content, should I do a blog post or should I do a podcast? And I responded with the question, well, which one would you enjoy doing and will you do consistently? Is that kind of how you ought to start with your filter on the simplicity side of asking what you actually or what feels right for you?
Definitely. And then the other thing you want to ask yourself is, what are your values? That's that's the initial step. It feels like a very cliche exercise, but that's where it all starts. Your simplicity filter sits right on top of your values, your biggest values, what's important to you. And as I created my own simplicity filter, my series of my filter questions, what I realized, Bobby, is that my previous business, my partnership, it failed every single question in that filter. I just wished that I had it back then so I could get out earlier. Before the panic attacks started actually telling me that it's time to go. I didn't know that I needed to go. My body did, but I didn't. And so as I started experiencing panic attacks, I started examining, what is happening? What is going on? Why? Why am I feeling this way? What is not in alignment? Like, what the heck is happening to me? And as I walked away from that business and panic attacks eased up, I started seeing what it was. And so I was happy to learn that, it was just misalignment, a big, fat misalignment.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And it's funny because I'm going through an online training program right now. And part of what we did at the very beginning that I think a lot of entrepreneurs don't do is ask yourself, what business do you want? Do you want to be a solopreneur? Do you want to have a small business? Do you want to have a micro business? Or do you want to have a big business? And then align your activities based upon what you actually want. And don't worry about someone else telling you that you need to do it differently.
For sure. Yes, absolutely. And I had a business of my own for 11 years before I got into a partnership. And the idea that my former business partner approached me with was so hot. It was too good to reject. And I'm still glad I did it. But if I had my simplicity filter at that time, I would have approached many things differently, including my relationship with my business partner, my role in the business, the kind of things that I was taking upon myself. I would understand myself a lot better. So, I don't regret the journey. It taught me a lot, but now I know better.
Yeah, I think this has been a great discussion. And I want to move on to the other topic we're going to talk about, virtual summits. But before we do, is there a resource that you would recommend for the listeners who maybe want to try to bring simplicity into their business and their lives? How can they go about doing that? What's the best resource out there for them?
So I have two resources on that. One is a little bit more mindset and philosophical conversation about simplicity and the way you build your business in a simplicity-driven way. And if you go to simplicitycircle.com, there is a free book that you can download. It's called The Simplicity Principle, how I discovered this whole idea and how you can apply it to your business right now, how much complexity you are experiencing right now that you may have the ability to change. So that's more like a download for you to read. And then the other resource is more practical. So I have an assessment. It's called Unique Marketing Personality Assessment. When you take it, you can see what kind of marketing personality you have. You may be a teacher, a builder, a connector, or a champion. For example, I am high on builder. My second high is teacher. So if I am following somebody who is a champion and a connector and I'm attempting to make that work, I'm going to fail. And I did several times before I even understood that, right? So you want to know what kind of marketing personality you have. And it's a free, very simple, very quick quiz that you can take at uniquemarketingpersonality.com. And it'll tell you what marketing approach, what marketing personality you have.
You know what? I tell you what, as soon as we get off this, I'm going to take that assessment. I think I know what I am. But
I think I already know who you are based on what you do. But yeah, I'd be curious to get that confirmation, Bobby.
Well, why don't you go ahead and tell me, what do you think I am?
I'm betting that you are a connector because you run this podcast. And I also will say that I started 2 podcasts in the past and I dropped them after about 10 episodes each. I never stuck to them because I am not a connector.
Well, it's interesting. I think I'm going to come out as a teacher, but we'll see. But I'm definitely going to take that. And listeners,
your top 2 is what make up your personality. So you may be a connector and a teacher, or a teacher and connector. But yeah, definitely let me know.
Yeah, I will. And listeners, I think you ought to do this because I know in a lot of different mentors and people whose programs I've invested, one of the first things they say is you have to figure out what is your unique personality. And so I think it's very important to understand that. And the problem is, these other people just tell you and expect you to figure it out. I think having this assessment is a great value. So I want to thank you for that, Milana. But now I want to move to the next subject, which is virtual summits. But actually, you got in the field back when they were run on telephones predominantly. And so you coined the term Telesummit. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, the telephone was the thing, the bridge line. It was very innovative and very cool. It was a very cool thing to sit in your kitchen and talk to people on a bridge line who are sitting in their kitchens in Australia, in New Zealand, in Malaysia. It was the coolest thing ever. So yes, bridge lines were the thing.
Now, it's funny. I'm laughing at myself as you're saying that because I actually realized that there are probably some people listening to this who don't know what a bridge line is or have never heard that term. So why don't you tell everybody what's a bridge line?
A bridge line is a conference line. You dial into a phone number using your good old telephone. You put in a PIN code when you're prompted, and you have joined a conversation with all the other people who did the same thing, who dialed into a conference line along with you.
Yeah. As a lawyer, you can imagine I've been on my fair share of conference calls, and I never enjoyed them. But, why don't we take a step back? What drew you initially to the idea of these virtual summits or telesummits?
The idea came to me after I attended a live event. It was called a think tank. I was personally invited. It was sort of a mastermind or a roundtable. People exchanged ideas, shared best practices. It was a very cool experience. And it was only 2 hours away from my house, which is why I was able to attend. But when I came home and I thought, I wonder if I can create something like that myself or other think tank type events out there in my industry, in my space. And maybe they were, but they were all over the country and the world. And I had a 3-year-old and a 9-year-old at home at that time, so I couldn't really travel. And so as a builder, builders like to build and create, I created my own little think tank, coaching think tank. And so I started inviting people who I wanted to participate in it. And when the person who organized the original think tank found out, he called me that day and said, Milana, I love that you're doing it, but can you not call it a think tank? Can you call it something else? Because if you get big and I get big and we're both really well known and popular, people are going to be confused. So I hung up the phone and I was a little upset because I really liked the word think tank. And I started thinking, what else could I name it as? So long story short, I came up with the word Telesummit. It was a summit because it's the gathering of the heads, of the leaders, and tele, of course, because it was over a telephone. The word Telesummit was born, and that is the story. But one of the speakers that I invited to participate said, Milana, I would love to participate in your Telesummit, but why don't you open it to the public? So the result of that statement is what created this whole virtual summit or telesummit, that it was not just a mastermind, it was not just a think tank or roundtable or gathering between leaders and thought leaders and successful business owners. It was an event that became open to everybody who was willing to pay a few bucks. I think I charged like $97 to participate, to get on a bridge line, and a few $100 to buy the recordings and the transcripts. And that was my first event.
Well, and that's an amazing story of how it came about. And let me ask you, because now I've actually participated, I mentioned, in a virtual summit as a speaker, and things I think have changed. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, nowadays it seems like almost every one of these virtual summits, there is a free admission level and then a paid admission level. Is that how they're normally run these days?
Yeah, that was the thing that I discovered after a while, after a few years of taking a break from summits, because I did them between 2005 and 2012. And then I didn't do them for about 5 years. I just started doing them again recently. What I discovered is that all summits are free. And I said, what's happening? What's going on? I used to charge hundreds of dollars for my summits. What happened? What actually happened, Bobby, is that summits became more of a marketing event than a training event. That's what started happening. So that transition is what caused a virtual summit to become a free event designed as an interview series and as a list building venture. Those are the two reasons why summits have gotten bad reputation lately, because there's so many of them. And you're typically approached by some newbie that you've never heard of who wants to build a list. And so they're using their guest speakers, their guest experts, to build a mailing list. You speak at my summit and you share it with your audience, and I get to build my list. How wonderful, except not really for speakers and not really for the audience. So the only person who wins in this kind of setup is the person who is organizing the summit. The audience doesn't win because they get, a carrot dangling in front of them that, hey, here's a topic I want to teach you about. I'm going to share with you just like 1 little % of it, but for the rest of it, you have to buy my program. So the audience doesn't win, and the speakers don't really win because they are being used for their list. And so as I started teaching summits, I created a program called Summits Made Simple. I am on a mission right now to change the way summits are done so that they're more valuable, so that everybody wins. The host, the speakers, and most importantly, the customers, the end user, the people that we're creating it for.
Well, so you've told us what's wrong with existing summits, and it's interesting you said that because on this recent summit that I was on, there was a free part and then a paid part. So there were 2 interviews, one for anyone who got in free, and then a paid got a second interview. And the host asked if I had or if I would be creating any kind of freebies or something like that. And so I actually created courses that gave template documents and training for the 2 issues that I was doing that they could get absolutely free. But I kind of gathered afterwards, I was the only one who did that. Most of the other speakers didn't. So why don't you tell us, how should you run a summit if you're going to do one of these summits and try to make everybody win?
Right. Well, the biggest area of mistakes that I see is the theme of your summit. In fact, what I teach, I take people through 5 pillars. And the first pillar is we try to come up with a very hot, specific, relevant, unique, original theme. Because I've been invited to a bunch of summits in the last few months, and I can't tell you what their names are, how they're different from each other. They're all cookie cutter summits to me. They're all lookalike. Let me think. Achievers Edge, Achievers Advantage, Breakthrough Your Barriers, Breakthrough to the Next Level Summit. I mean, all of those summit names, they're very generic, right? And so that's the first most important thing to have a really successful summit. It is, I would say it is at least 50% of your summit success is that your theme is original, interesting, not a cookie cutter, memorable, easy to brand, and something that speakers want to participate in, right? So the theme is going to be that very first thing that you want to come up with that guides your success.
Well, see, it's interesting that you mentioned that. So I assume you would say you shouldn't try to do a summit that's going to cover every aspect of success. Online marketing, for example. That would not be a good idea.
Exactly. Unless you have a very unique approach to it. Actually, the summit that I'm putting together does have a lot of aspects of online marketing and growing a business, but it's actually a roadmap. It's a blueprint. And each topic is a piece of the puzzle. It's a piece of a roadmap, I would say, to get to the point that I'm trying to make. But it has that angle. It has that unique approach to it. And it's very clear who it's for, who would be attracted to it. I'm working with my students in the program right now, and the themes that they are bringing to me, for the most part, I look at those themes and I cannot picture the person that would be attracted to that. There's no clear avatar. And so that's a very important piece of conceiving your theme. Who is the avatar? What does that person want? When they go to bed, what are they worrying about? When they wake up, what's the first concern on their mind? Like, that's how clear you want to get.
I think that's great advice. And I think it's interesting because what you're telling people, what you're telling the listeners is, in a sense, building a successful virtual summit is the same as building a successful business. You have to start with knowing who your customer is, what they care about, what they need, and delivering that rather than just trying to take.
So I'm so glad you pointed that out, because a lot of people who joined my program recently, they said, but I don't have a niche. And so my response to that was, yes, well, you can spend the next 7 years trying to find your niche, or you can create a summit, and that will force you to get very specific, because a summit has to have a promise. What is the promise of your summit? And that gets people to think differently. Like I have 30% of people in the program right now who already suddenly started seeing like, oh my God, this could be my niche. I'm saying, yes, that's the whole point. So, we're trying to get specific. So theme is like the first piece, the first pillar of your summit. I'm happy to share the other 4 if we have time for that.
Yeah, sure. Why don't you go through those quickly?
Yeah, so the second one is your topics, which is interesting because a lot of people will move from a theme straight to inviting speakers. And I actually recommend that you reverse that. You want to have topics first that you want to cover in your summit to make sure that it's a valuable training, that it's a valuable program. And then the third pillar is inviting speakers or guest experts. And not every expert is a good fit for your summit. Just because they're an expert on your topic doesn't make them a good candidate to speak. They have to understand the value of participating in a summit without asking for money. There's a lot of speakers who will say, oh, and how much will you pay me for speaking in your summit, right? That's a different mindset, different model. And then the fourth pillar is money. How are you going to monetize your summit? What's the model? Where's the money going to come from? Most people will say, well, I'm going to sell recordings. But I will say, I will reveal a secret to you, Bobby. The recordings is only one of many. Actually teach 7 different ways to monetize your summit. Recordings are really going to cover your expenses. Recordings are going to cover your website. Maybe you have a virtual assistant. Maybe you pay for the shopping cart, whatever it is. But recordings is usually the smallest piece of money that can come from your summit. There's so many other ways to generate income. You can have affiliate sales from your speakers. You can offer your own product or service at the end. There's so many other ways. So you want to understand, like one of the things I did in my summit is I offered a 3-tier way, a 3-level way to participate in my summit. You could participate by calling into a bridge line. You could get the recordings with transcripts, or you could get all of that plus a post-summit 30-day group coaching program where you get to, focus on what you're going to do next. So that was like $500 level. And the majority of people who signed up for my summit went for that one, for the highest priced one, right?
Wow.
So the last pillar is about promotion. And that's where you're going to get all the people into your summit. And the thing I'm going to say about that is that most summit hosts rely primarily on their speakers for promotion. And I will say that it's a very risky game to play, because if you don't have any other way to promote your summit, like through social media or through advertising or through your speaking, through your podcast, however else you're doing this, you may end up not getting enough people to participate in your summit. So what I focus on with people is, yes, I want to teach you other ways to promote it. But I also like to say that requiring your speakers to promote your summit can actually backfire. If you've ever been approached to speak, you might remember that they also asked you, oh, Bobby, by the way, do you have a list of 5,000 subscribers? Because you also required to promote this summit. For me, It's an instant no. I do not promote summits. But go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I don't mind, when I was a speaker, I had no problem promoting it, but I've had other ones where they do ask those questions and they are pre-screening, and you're right. They won't even consider you unless you have a list of 5,000 people. And, I wonder about that logic and about whether that's a good way to go. And you clearly don't think so.
Well, imagine that, you were invited maybe a couple of times. Imagine, someone like me who's been in summits a lot. I get an invitation at least once a week. Does that mean that I get to promote a summit per week? Heck no, I can't do that, right? So I pick and choose. Sometimes I say yes, sometimes I say no. But what I was going to say is that I just talked to somebody, a former student of mine, who held a summit. She had 64 speakers, 40% of them promoted, and get this, she never required a list size minimum. She never asked anybody to sign an agreement where they were required to promote. They just promoted because they loved her energy. They loved the event. They loved her approach to the summit. And that's how you want to do this. You don't want to require. You want to motivate people, create space for your speakers to be excited to promote.
Right.
And that is the key to your summit success.
Right. So if you create an event that your speakers are proud of and really think is going to give value to their lists, they will gladly promote it. And that will get you the same result, it seems like.
Yes. So one of my students is creating a summit called the Trailblazer Summit. And I said, I want to be in it because I feel like I'm a trailblazer. I'm proud to be in a summit called the Trailblazer Summit, right? You nailed it. That's exactly the wording I'm using. Like, you want your speakers to trip over each other to be speaking than to be to feel proud to be in your summit, to be featured in your summit, be considered for your summit, right?
Yeah. And I think I mentioned to you before we got on that one of the things I was thinking about is I've thought about running a summit. And for me, it would be a bit different, right? I offer a service that is not something, I'm not going to have a bunch of lawyers talk because no one's going to show up at that.
I don't know.
Well, maybe they would, but I don't know that they would. But so I've thought about using something very much like this podcast where I would put on a summit that would help entrepreneurs who are looking to be thought leaders understand the process. So kind of walk through, have someone who would give some real training about things that we've talked about today about, for example, figuring out what kind of business you want, figuring out your customer avatar, and various, pieces along the way, with the notion that part of my monetization strategy would be that, hey, the people who would show up for that training might be interested in my services, either my high ticket or one of the things I've toyed with is creating a membership site where I have a membership site with forms and all of those things to meet entrepreneurs' legal needs. Is that something, as I've described it to you, that would sound like the kind of thing that you might say, well, that might be a valuable summit? Or would you say, no, don't even try that. It's a crazy idea?
You can absolutely do that. And in fact, you just named one of the 4 biggest goals that you want to keep in mind as you're designing your summit. You want to create a summit where you build an audience for your paid offer, for your paid product or service. The question is going to be, why would people sign up? Like, that is the question that is going to be answered by you understanding your avatar. Why would they give you your name, their name and email, maybe even upgrade to buy recordings? Why would they buy recordings in the future? Like, what's the promise for them that they sign up for? If you can answer that question and you feel it's valuable on that end for your audience, then you've got a winner.
Well, let me ask you this. One thing that came to my mind while you were describing kind of the promise or the problem with summits these days, where there are these marketing events, not training events, is, do you suggest that people require that their speakers, actually give some real value? And if so, how do you enforce that?
Absolutely. You are in complete control and in charge of your summit's content. That's one of the biggest things that I want people to understand, is that when you invite people to speak in your summit as a guest expert, they're not in charge of what they share. You are. For example, right now, you are guiding me through what you want me to share. The same thing happens in the summit. You want your listeners, your audience, to get value. Therefore, it is your job to make sure that the content that each expert delivers is valuable, practical, oriented around teaching points, something that people can take away, something that's useful. One of the biggest complaints that I have noticed when I was doing research for my program is that a lot of summit sessions are actual interviews and success stories. You'll go to our website and you'll see 40 successful women entrepreneurs share their success stories. Who cares? I don't even know who these women are. Why would I care about their success stories? Now, there is a point where people will be curious about somebody's success story. But because there are so many summits that do that, because every summit you go to, you see 40 successful people, entrepreneurs share their success stories. 60 experts share their secret to success. It's no longer as valuable. It's actually very overwhelming. People leave most summits overwhelmed, which is why as I'm designing my own summit and I'm teaching my students to create their summit, I really stress the idea of giving your participants sort of a roadmap. Help them make sense of everything that you're delivering. Help them apply it, right?
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And it's interesting because the way you describe these summits is what I viewed most business podcasts were doing these days. And that's why I didn't you probably noticed, I didn't start this interview by asking you about your journey. So many podcasts are doing that. I wanted to give actionable advice. So is that what you're saying? You, for example, give practical advice about an actual thing that you can do rather than just having successful people come on and talk about their success on a summit?
In relation to the specific topic that you invited that speaker to cover. My very first summit, now I'm a product developer, so I always, I'm a teacher, I'm a trainer, I always approach everything from the perspective of training, creating a training. And I remember having these topics on my list, I want somebody to cover the biggest mistakes that coaching practitioners make as they're building their practice. And so I took that topic and I approached one specific person. I said, I see that you wrote a book on how to build a coaching practice, and I'm putting together this coaching business Telesummit. I'm wondering if you can address specifically the top 3 to 5 biggest mistakes that coaches make. And he was blown away by that approach. He said, this is the first time I'm ever approached to speak about something that specific. He probably never I've even had a presentation prepared for this. He's never done it before. He probably had a canned presentation on how to build a coaching practice. But the way I approached it, I wanted that specific topic. I wanted that specific angle. For someone else, I approached specifically, how do you build a coaching business on the ground? How do you do it locally? Not online, but locally. What's the difference? The person I approached was so excited. She said, I never talked about that, but I've actually built a coaching practice using grassroots marketing strategy. So these kind of topics that I wanted to cover, and I approached every speaker with their unique individual topic, people loved it. Not only the speakers loved it, but the audience loved it, because I chose each topic almost as a juicy headline. If you haven't noticed, every topic was a headline that I wanted to cover. So I already thought of marketing my summit even before I started inviting speakers.
I think you just gave a fantastic piece of advice for people. And I want to make sure that the listeners heard that. And I want to make sure that I heard it right. What I heard you just say is that, in a sense, what I should do if I'm putting together a summit, and whether it's 30 speakers or however many, I should write the headline that I want for each one of those speakers, even before I go out and talk to them, and say, this is what I want you to talk about. Is that what you're suggesting people ought to do?
Absolutely. So you might start with a topic, what topic do you want to cover? I have somebody right now who's an event planner, and her theme for her summit is how to fill an event. So what are the pain points that new workshop leaders or new event leaders will run into? What are they thinking? What are they scared of? And then build her summit around each of those pain points, turning each topic into a benefit-oriented headline. This is where my copywriting experience has been very useful to me. This is what I definitely teach in my program. But you got it right, Bobby. Every topic is a potential headline that you're going to use in the marketing of your summit.
Wow. That's great, because a lot of these summits, when I've looked at them, they just say, for example, so-and-so will talk about, and it's a broad topic that is not juicy. So it's really interesting to hear that piece of advice, to think about your headlines and then make sure that your questions are, and the presentation from each person meets that. So I think that's great advice. Now, I could keep talking about this for forever, but I don't think we have time. So I want to be respectful of that. But I do want to ask you about resources. Are there resources out there for listeners who might be interested in investigating the idea of creating a virtual summit? Where should they go to learn more?
So I have set up, and again, I've taught many people individually how to do a summit. I have a former client who turned her summit strategy into a $1.2 million business over the course of several years. I have people who have generated thousands of dollars as a result of their summits, but this is actually the first year that I am teaching it publicly to a group. So I set up a resource website. If you go to summitsmadesimple.com, there is a really cool checklist. It's sort of like a planner that you can use to think through your summit. There are 5 biggest mistakes that people make with their summits. We address some of them today, but also there's a few more there that I talk about. And when you go there and put your name and email address into summitsmadesimple.com, you'll also be notified the next time I open doors to this program, which is actually going to be very shortly. Depending on when you release this conversation, it may literally be in a matter of weeks.
Okay, that's great. And folks, I think listeners, you should definitely take advantage of that if you're interested in learning more. Now, Milana, there's one question that I do like to ask. I don't ask a lot of canned questions, but one question I like to ask all my guests is essentially, I like to think in action steps. So what is something that the listeners could do either in 5 minutes a day or say that they could accomplish by the end of the week to start to build their business? Now, it could be related to simplicity, to summits, or anything else you want, but I want a quick and easy step that listeners can take to build their businesses.
So you want me to give you one step or a few steps?
One or a few. It could be a practice, whatever you think, something that they can take and really apply to their life and their business without having to, say, invest 4 hours a day for the rest of the week or for the rest of the month.
Yeah. So I tend to think in concepts and philosophies and mindsets lately, because I've done all the techniques and I've tried a lot of strategies and methods over the course of 17 years of, having multiple 6- and 7-figure businesses. So I'm a little bit kind of outside of the tactical thinking, because there's a lot of tactics out there. In fact, I like to say that there's a million ways to build $1 million business. Which way is for you? So I'm going to give you some, a piece of advice that I think is going to really help you from this point on to really stay in your simplicity zone, which is the zone where results come with ease and you are having a blast in your business. So here it is. It's a question. When left to your own devices, what do you naturally tend to do? The answer to this question holds the key to your success, because what you want to build your business around are the things that you naturally do, because you just do them. For example, I find myself organizing information into teachable formulas and systems when left to my own devices. You may actually, or I will say, coaches tend to coach that when left to their own devices, they coach. They immediately just start coaching people. If they're naturally born coaches, that's what they do. They just start, probing and asking questions and listening. Like that's what coaches do. I'm a teacher. And so I naturally start organizing. Like anything I see is immediately presented to my brain as a formula or a system, which I then have to quickly run to my computer and turn into a PowerPoint so I could teach it to others, right? I don't know what it is for you, but can you answer that question? Could it be what person can I connect them to, or how can I teach it simpler?
I think it is teaching for me. I'm very much in the mindset of trying to teach people the information they need, which is why I think that's what I enjoy about this podcast. That's what I enjoy about much of what I do. But it's interesting. I am going to take that marketing personality assessment to see, but what I love about that piece of advice that you gave is it's a spin on the old piece of advice that to figure out what you should do, ask what you would do if you weren't getting paid for it. But I think you've put it in a much better way.
Yeah. I mean, the goal of this question is really to understand what are your natural tendencies. One of my very good friends is a professional organizer. She came to my home and she said, "So what is your biggest complaint?" And I said, "Let's start with shoes." And she saw a bunch of shoes in a corner. And I said, "I don't like them there. I want a special place where people can just go and put their shoes when they enter the house." So she created like a little cubby where people could put their shoes. I organized them and it looked so beautifully organized and it just looked really nice and clean. 3 months later, she came back to me just to visit and she saw shoes in the same spot where they were originally. And she said, "You know what? It looks like this is where people are putting their shoes. Why don't we add a cubby here?" So this is what I mean. It's like I could not force my family to put the shoes in the place I wanted them to put them. So we just created, we just build on what is already happening. So can you build your business on what you are already naturally drawn to? How much more fun would it be instead of trying to, feel guilty about not doing certain things or trying to do certain things and not getting the results with them? When faced with a lot of different options and advice, the best strategy is to ask yourself, what do I want to do? And the key is to be really honest with your response, not trying to please anyone else. Let go of what anybody else may think of your decision. Because the moment you answer truthfully, the right answer will reveal itself, and it will come with clarity, confidence, excitement, and that sense of obviousness. Well, of course I need to do this. Of course I need to start networking more. Of course I need to start getting on stage more. Of course I need to develop a community where I get to connect with people, because I would do that anyway. I do that naturally. I do that every day. Why not charge money for that, right? These are just a few examples.
Yeah. I think it's great because we basically come full circle back to kind of a lot of the things we started with. And I think it's all great advice. And I want to thank you for coming on and offering it to listeners. Before I let you go, where can my listeners get in touch with you? You've mentioned a couple of places, but where's the best place for them to connect with you?
My home base is simplicityscircle.com. That will get you my free book, The Simplicity Principle. It'll get you into my free Facebook community. You'll get access to my blog. You'll get to watch a few videos that I've been putting out there around simplicity-driven entrepreneurship. So that'll get you into my world.
Okay. That is fantastic. I think people should do that. I'm actually going to get my copy of that book because I certainly want it. And I want to thank you again for being on, Milana. But
Thank you so much for having me, Bobby.
Yeah, well, that's it for now. So listeners, make sure to stay tuned for my quick legal lesson after the break.
And now for today's legal lesson.
Yay! Milana had some really great advice there, and I like what she talks about when it comes to simplicity. And that's actually where I'm going to focus my time in this legal lesson, which is a bit weird. You may think simplicity in law, is this guy crazy? Well, bear with me here. I want to talk about two different concepts here. First is, in a sense, this is a further reason why you might want to consider Milana's idea of simplicity. And the second is going to be, no matter what you're doing, how to simplify the deal, or how to simplify dealing with legal issues in your business. But first, let's talk about an additional value of adding simplicity to your business. Well, one of the advantages is that it will simplify your legal issues. It'll simplify what you have to do and all of those other things by having a limited number of things going on in your business. Now, why do I say that? Well, because everything you do in your business, there are potential legal implications. You have to understand the potential legal implications for all of the different things you're doing in your business. You also have to have documentation in place. You're going to have procedures in place to do all of these different things. So let's look at, a typical online entrepreneur who is kind of all over the place. And let's say you have a membership site and you have courses and you have one-on-one coaching and you have all of these different things going on. Well, guess what? You're going to need to create documentation to create legal procedures for each one of those. So for example, let's just go down that list. For a membership site, well, you're going to need terms of service for that. You're going to need to have a very specific instructions on what people get, how they get out of it, etc. And you will have disputes probably if you have members in a site. So you have to think about that. Then let's say you have a course and you sell a course. Well, that's a different product offering. So you have to think, okay, well, what are my policies for there? I need a terms of service for that. I need to get that in place. I need to think about how I'm doing that. You then, let's say you have coaching. Well, you need coaching agreements and agreements with every coaching client, and you've got to do that and keep that confidential and think about those issues. And so you just start thinking about it. As you do more and more things, your legal issues get more complicated. And then if you're like a typical online entrepreneur, you're also adding affiliate marketing, because why not? make some money off the links on your site. Well, okay, that adds another hurdle to your business. And maybe you are using all of these different complicated ways within your business. So let's say you're doing more than the simple, I have a landing page, here's my freebie, and then I'm going to email you and try to make money, which is the standard, a very simple way of doing business. If that's all you're doing, it's pretty simple to disclose things to people, and you can probably rely upon your basic software providers to help you with doing all of the things you need to do and do them right. And when I talk about this here, what I'm talking about are the privacy implications and the privacy policy implications. Now, at the time of this recording, we're about a couple of months away from what's called the GDPR coming into force. And that is a new privacy regulation that applies in Europe, but also to if you're American and you're doing business with people in Europe and collecting data from people in Europe, it applies to you as well. Well, the central tenet of that is that you have to disclose what you're going to do. Disclose what you're collecting and how you're going to use it. That's really, from your perspective, the important thing. And also give people a way to opt out and have the information removed. Well, so let's just say you're doing very simple things. Let's say you're using a basic lead page of some sort, by Lead Pages or some other landing page company, to collect information, and then that goes to a single place into your email provider. And then you email people and that's it. Well, it's pretty easy to disclose to people what you're doing there. But a lot of entrepreneurs are complicating things. And they're complicating things for a reason, because there are advantages. But they do that. But then they, for example, have a Zap from a Zapier or Zapier, however you pronounce it. Or they have something from, or if this, then that, which basically takes data from one place, migrates it somewhere else, and creates all these problems. Well, so if you think about it, here's the problem with doing that. Number one, are you disclosing that in your privacy policy, that you're doing all of those back end things? Again, you need to think about that and give some good thought to disclosing what you're doing and how you're processing this confidential or this information you get from people. But also, here's the bigger piece. Well, if someone unsubscribes from your mailing list, okay, great. Well, that hopefully, if you have a reputable email provider, they are going to become GDPR compliant. So they're going to meet it, and you're not going to have to worry about that. But if you've migrated that information elsewhere, guess what? You are going to have to take steps to make sure that you manually get that information out of other places, or set up procedures to do so, etc. But the idea is you have to be a lot more vigilant when you start doing these complicated things. Now, I'm not saying not to do them. I'm simply saying that it's going to add legal frustrations for your life. And what I'll tell you is there are very successful online entrepreneurs who have adopted a very simple way of doing business. Now, that doesn't mean they're not doing things right. It means that they have perfected a method. There's one entrepreneur I know who I can think of who, what she does is she offers courses. At the time of this recording, I think she has 3 courses and she has a 4th that's going to be coming out soon. And that's it. Those are her only paid offerings. And then she does some affiliate marketing for people, but that's it. And not only that, from what I can tell, she has a very simple method of an email marketing system that sends emails. She sends emails from time to time, but that's about it. And then she does retargeted ads on Facebook. Now, with her business, and she is making, I have no idea, but I'm guessing tons and tons of money from how successful she is. I've seen some signs that tell me that, she's at least 7 figures, if not into 8 figures in revenue each year, just based on looking at her performance. And so if that's the case, and you just start thinking about that, she doesn't have to get too complicated to make money. You can find ways of being simple and still making a living. So what I would encourage you to think about is, as you start to look at your business and decide whether to simplify, add in the legal thought to it. Say, well, would it simplify things for me legally? Because that is an important consideration. So that's the first part. The first part of this lesson is that there are benefits from a legal perspective of simplifying your business. So if you want to go down the task of what Milana taught us of having simplification, there is a reason there. But now I want to address the other one. Regardless of what you do in your business, you should simplify the legal issues by creating processes, putting in place checklists, and thinking through, okay, so every time I launch a new product, I need to do X, Y, and Z. And you need to create those checklists and think through a lot of issues. Some obvious things that come up is, number one, you need to do a trademark search for the name. Number two, you need to get an agreement in place depending on what kind of thing it is, whether it's a terms of service or a one-on-one contract, whatever it is. Prepare that. You need to think about changes to your privacy policy on your website. You need to think about a refund policy. But the point is that every one of these things you need to do is create a checklist so that you know and you can feel confident every time you launch a new product, for example, that it's not an issue. And that way you're also not having to recreate or, process each time. Instead, you just have a checklist and boom, 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 you're done. So I would encourage you to come up with that, whether it's working with a lawyer or going through and coming up, lessons that you can get from this podcast or elsewhere to figure out what you need to do, but create those checklists and make them part of your launch protocol. When you launch a product, a course, whatever, make sure that you go through your legal checklist as well. That will simplify your life and make sure that you're not making a mistake or somehow creating liability as you grow your business over time. So again, the two central lessons here. Number one, as you think about whether to simplify your business, think about the fact that that will have legal benefits. And second, in whatever you do, make sure that you make the legal process as simple as possible with checklists, processes, etc. That's it for this episode. And for this week, we've got another great episode coming next week. So tune in for that. Again, if you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out. But also, if you're enjoying the show, please give us a rating and review on iTunes or whatever, wherever you get the podcast from. That helps to make sure other people can see it. But also share the show with others who you think can get value from it. That's it for this show. This is Bobby Klink signing off.
Thanks for listening. And remember to visit mistakes.youronlinegenius.com to get your essential guide to the 4 legal mistakes that can doom your business and how to avoid them. Join us next week for another episode to expand your online genius and your success.